The photograph hit Dale like a fist to the jaw. Brenda laughing, her arm linked with another man's at their usual corner booth. Honolulu sunshine bright on her face. Mr. Peterson had sent it an hour ago. The weight of it buckled his knees. He sank onto the couch, the cold glass of beer slipping from his hand, pooling forgotten on the rug. Brenda's text, sent just minutes before the photo, simply read, "Still at work, honey. Long night." Dale sat on the edge of the couch, the phone still clutched tight in his hand. The screen had gone dark, but the image was seared into his mind, clearer than any photograph. Brenda, her hair a little brighter, her smile wider than he'd seen it in months, leaning into another man. The ocean stretched behind them, a vibrant blue that mocked the gray light filtering through his living room window. A knot had formed somewhere deep in his gut, a cold, hard stone that refused to dissolve. Mr. Peterson, the private investigator, had been efficient. Too efficient, perhaps. He'd confirmed everything in less than a week. The Honolulu trip, the man named Mark, the shared hotel room. Every detail had been meticulously cataloged, culminating in the single damning photograph. He thought back to the conversation he'd had with Peterson only yesterday. The man's voice, flat and professional, had laid out the facts without emotion, like a mechanic listing car repairs. Dale had tried to argue, to find a loophole, but Peterson's evidence had been irrefutable. Brenda had told him she was at a real estate conference in Chicago, learning new selling strategies. She was supposed to be back Saturday. It was Thursday. Their marriage was almost 10 years old. 10 years since he'd stood opposite her in a small church outside town, promising things he'd meant with every fiber of his being. He worked at his father's tire company, Jensen Tires, a business his grandfather started. He'd been there since he was 18, working his way up, learning every bolt and every customer. It was steady, predictable, a good living. Brenda had found her own success in real estate. She was good at it, too. Her name was on billboards along the highway, her face smiling down at drivers, promising them the perfect home. She'd always had that knack for connecting with people, for making them feel understood. They never had children. That had been a quiet ache for a long time, a space in their lives they'd both skirted around. Brenda had claimed infertility years ago, a diagnosis she'd said she got from her doctor. Then she'd told him she was having her tubes tied, just to be sure, to avoid further disappointment. At the time, he'd grieved the loss of a future he'd imagined. Now, looking at the picture on his phone, the empty nursery they'd once planned felt like a blessing in disguise, a void that hadn't been filled only to be shattered. The changes in Brenda had started subtly, about a year ago. First, it was the girls' nights, more frequent, running later into the evening. He'd be in bed, reading a book, and the clock would crawl past midnight, then 1, then 2. When she finally came home, she'd move quietly, but he'd still hear the click of the lock, the soft brush of her clothes. Her hair, usually so neat, would be a little disheveled. Sometimes there was the faint, stale smell of cigarette smoke clinging to her sweater, even though she didn't smoke. When he'd mention it, she'd brush it off, blaming it on hanging out with friends who did, or the crowded bar. "Are you all right?" he'd ask one Tuesday morning, watching her pour coffee, her eyes still a little red-rimmed. "You look tired." She'd slammed the ceramic pot back onto the burner. "Look, Jace," she'd snapped, her voice sharp. "This is none of your business. I'm a big girl, and I don't need you telling me what to do, so back off, okay?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. A moment later, her shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," she'd mumbled, not meeting his eyes. "Just a lot of stress at work, long hours. You know how it is." He'd nodded, letting it go, wanting to believe her. Their sex life, once a comfortable rhythm, had dwindled to almost nothing. He'd reach for her in bed, and she'd turn, mumbling about being exhausted, about an early meeting. Her interest in his day, in the small details of his life at the shop, faded too. He'd talk about a tricky alignment or a new customer, and her eyes would glaze over, a polite, distant smile on her lips. She was there, but she wasn't. Then came the lie he couldn't ignore. It was a Saturday. He'd called her office line to ask about something specific, a property near the lake he thought they might invest in. Her assistant, a young woman named Sarah, told him Brenda was out showing properties all day. An hour later, he'd driven past her office on his way to pick up lumber. Brenda's car was in the parking lot, distinctive with its personalized plates. He parked down the street, waited for 20 minutes, then walked past the building. Her car was still there. He called her cell phone, no answer. When she finally called him back late that afternoon, she said, "Sorry, honey, just got out of a showing. Been at the office all day, just nonstop." He had swallowed the words, the accusation, the certainty that she was lying. That night, lying in bed, the silence between them felt thick, suffocating. He turned to her, the mattress creaking softly. "Do you still love me, Brenda?" The question felt small, pathetic, hanging in the quiet room. She took a long time to answer. Then she sighed, a soft, weary sound. "Of course, Jace," she whispered, her voice rough. She turned, her hand finding his in the dark. "Don't be silly. I'm just tired. Work, you know." She moved closer, and they made love, a familiar comfort, a brief erasure of the doubt. For a few days, he felt a fragile hope bloom. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe it was just stress. But a month later, the late nights started again. The distant looks, the excuses. The knot in his gut tightened, pulling him down, slowly, inexorably. The phone rang just as Dale was finishing up in the shop, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. It was Gary Olson, his oldest friend, a man he'd known since kindergarten. Gary's voice, usually easygoing, was tight, strained. "Jace, I need to see you tonight. I really can't say over the phone, but it's important." There was a tremor in his voice that Dale hadn't heard before, a frantic edge that made the hair on his arm stand up. Dale felt a cold premonition settle in his stomach, replacing the quiet ache he'd been living with. He agreed to meet at the Oak Haven Bar, a dimly lit place on the edge of town, usually quiet on a Tuesday. Gary was already there when Dale arrived, nursing a beer, his face pale under the bar's neon glow. He didn't look up until Dale slid into the booth opposite him. The usual banter was absent. Gary just stared into his glass, tracing the condensation with his finger. Dale waited, the silence stretching, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Gary sighed, a long, ragged sound. "Look, Jace," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "This ain't easy. I saw Brenda last week at the Miller's Ridge Festival. I saw her with someone." He paused, taking a long drink. Dale felt his jaw clench, the cold stone in his gut growing larger. She was with some guy, kissing him, holding hands. He had his hands all over her ass." Gary averted his eyes as if the words themselves were painful to utter. The detail, "hands all over her ass," landed like a physical blow, shocking Dale with his vulgar intimacy, painting a stark, undeniable image. Gary then pulled out his phone, his thumb fumbling with the screen. He turned it towards Dale. The image was clear, undeniable. Brenda, her face flushed, laughing, her arm wrapped around a man Dale didn't recognize. They were close, too close. His hand was, indeed, resting possessively on her lower back, just as Gary had described. The festival lights blurred behind them, but their faces were sharp, illuminated by the flash. It was proof, laid bare and undeniable. Dale felt a simmering rage rise, hot and acidic in his throat. He swallowed it down, his voice coming out as a low, guttural, "Damn it." He looked at Gary, whose eyes were still fixed on the table. Can you email that to me?" Dale asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Gary nodded, already tapping away at his phone. "And by it," Dale continued, his mind already shifting. "Do you know any good private investigators? Someone discreet. I need to know what the hell is going on." Gary looked up then, his eyes full of sympathy. He gave Dale a name, Mr. Peterson, and a number scribbled on a napkin, then offered to buy him another beer. Dale shook his head, pushing himself out of the booth. He needed to be alone. He got home to an unexpected sight. Brenda was in the kitchen, humming softly, a suitcase open on the counter, clothes neatly folded beside it. She was home early, much earlier than her usual long night routine. "Hey, honey," she said, looking up, a bright, almost artificial smile on her face. "Surprise? Got out of work early. Thought I'd get a head start on packing for Vegas." Las Vegas, another convention. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Oh yeah? Vegas, huh?" He kept his voice flat, neutral. "Funny thing happened today. Gary was telling me about a friend of his. His wife, she got caught cheating. Made a real mess of things. Lost everything, apparently. Husband filed for divorce, took her to the cleaners. He watched her carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. He saw it then, a flicker, a barely perceptible tightening around her eyes, a quick flinch of her shoulders. It was enough. It would kill me, he added, his voice low, if you ever did anything like that to me. Brenda turned fully, her smile softening, her hand reaching for his arm. Jace, what are you talking about? Don't be silly. I would never do that to you. I love you too much. Her words were smooth, practiced, a familiar comfort that now felt like a well-worn lie. He forced a small smile, squeezing her hand, letting her believe he was reassured. The next morning, the first thing Dale did was call the number Gary had given him. Mr. Peterson answered on the third ring, his voice crisp and professional. Dale outlined his suspicions, keeping his tone calm, factual, leaving out the emotional turmoil churning beneath. Peterson listened, asked a few pointed questions, and promised to start immediately. Peterson delivered quickly. A few days later, his email arrived. Brenda's affair wasn't with a random man at a festival. It was with Mark Davis, a colleague at her real estate firm. They frequently slipped away to the Riverbend Motel just outside of town for lunch hours or late afternoons. The details were clinical, precise, delivered with detached professionalism. The motel name, the frequency, even the make and model of Mark Davis's car. It confirmed everything. The email ended with a stark warning. Mr. Jensen, Peterson had written, these situations often involve financial maneuvering. I recommend you contact a lawyer specializing in infidelity and divorce cases. The sooner, the better. The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. Divorce. It wasn't just a betrayal now, it was a battle. Dale found Mr. Clark's office on the third floor of a brick building downtown, overlooking the county courthouse. Clark was a man in his late 50s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with eyes that seemed to have seen every kind of marital dispute. He listened to Dale's story, nodding occasionally, making notes on a legal pad. When Dale finished, Clark steepled his fingers. Mr. Jensen, he said, his voice measured, this is not uncommon, but we need to be prepared, quietly. Gather everything, every detail. We'll need a comprehensive investigation, not just into her current activities, but her financial assets and anything from her past that might be relevant. So Dale started. He documented everything with the methodical precision of a man dismantling an engine. Brenda's late nights, the times she left, the times she came home, her increasing aloofness, the way she'd flinch if he accidentally brushed her arm. He noticed new spending habits, designer clothes he'd never seen before, expensive jewelry she'd try to pass off as a gift from a client. He set up a dedicated folder on his computer, a digital vault for the decay of his marriage. The monitoring software was next, suggested by Mr. Peterson. A few clicks, a few minutes alone with her laptop and phone while she was at a real estate seminar. And the invisible tendrils were in place. He watched as the evidence mounted. Texts explicitly detailing rendezvous, pet names, whispered promises of a future with Mark Davis. Photos sent from Brenda's phone to Mark's, of them together, sometimes in his car, sometimes in what looked like the motel room. The tracker on her car, tucked neatly under the bumper, painted an undeniable map of her movements. Work, the gym, the grocery store, and then, inevitably, the Riverbend Motel. The frequency of the motel visits surprised him, but the certainty of them did not. It was just more data, more undeniable proof of the lie she was living. Then came the deeper dive from Mr. Peterson. The financial records. Brenda had been busy. For months, small amounts, then larger sums, had been siphoned from their joint savings account. Not enough to trigger an immediate alarm, but enough to accumulate into a significant sum. A hidden personal account opened months ago was now bulging, a secret nest egg for her new life. Peterson's report detailed the transfers, the dates, the amounts, a meticulous chronicle of her calculated deception. But it was the next piece of information that truly broke him, shattered the last illusion, and left him reeling in a way the infidelity alone hadn't. Peterson's background check had delved into Brenda's medical history, her infertility diagnosis, the tubes tied years ago. The report stated the procedure had been performed before she even met Dale. Before their first date, before she charmed him into believing in a shared future, before the discussions of children, before she claimed her tubes were tied a few years after we were married. What the hell, Dale muttered to himself, the words catching in his throat. He read the sentence again, the cold, clinical language of the report, confirming the premarital surgery. The infertility was not a tragic twist of fate, but a deliberate, calculated deception. She had never intended to have children with him. The ache he'd felt for so long, the quiet acceptance of their childless future, now felt like a cruel joke, a wound deliberately inflicted by the woman he had vowed to cherish. This wasn't just about sex with another man. This was a fundamental betrayal of their entire imagined life together. It revealed a cold, manipulative core he hadn't known existed. That night, Brenda was home, making dinner, humming another unfamiliar tune. Dale walked into the kitchen, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Heard something interesting today," he said, keeping his voice light, almost conversational. "My buddy Jim, his wife just confessed to him. Said she lied about not being able to have kids, had a procedure done years before they even met. He's pretty messed up about it. Says he feels like their whole marriage was a setup." Brenda paused, stirring the pasta sauce. Her back was to him, but Dale saw the subtle stiffening of her shoulders. She didn't turn immediately. When she did, her smile was a little too bright, a little too practiced. "Oh, that's terrible," she said, her voice a shade higher than usual. "People can be so cruel." He saw it, though, a flicker in her eyes, a quick shadow of fear before she masked it, a single, almost imperceptible twitch of her lip. She recovered quickly, but the mask had slipped for a fraction of a second, and Dale had seen the truth underneath. His initial shock and raw pain began to transform. The confusion solidified into a chilling clarity. The hurt morphed into a cold, calculated fury. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to dismantle her, piece by piece. Retribution, he realized, would be the only way to mend this deep, festering wound. He would not just get divorced, he would ensure she lost everything, just as she had stolen everything from him. The rage that had been simmering in Dale now settled into a cold, calculated focus. His revenge would not be loud or impulsive. It would be meticulous, precise, and aimed at the one thing Brenda valued most, her comfortable life and financial security. And Mark Davis, her co-conspirator, would be caught in the crossfire. Dale spent hours, often late into the night, poring over the documents Peterson had sent, mapping out every move like a chess player planning checkmate. He'd learned a great deal about Mark Davis. Beyond the affair, Peterson's deeper dive revealed a significant gambling addiction. Mark wasn't just a regular at local casinos. He had substantial debts, stretching back years, to various lenders and even some less reputable sources. He was living beyond his means, desperate, vulnerable. This was a weakness Dale could exploit, a crack in their seemingly perfect facade. The plan began to solidify. Sow discord, exploit weaknesses, and then dismantle. Dale began moving money. Not a sudden dramatic withdrawal that would alert Brenda, but careful legal transfers from their joint accounts into the private account he had established. Small amounts, just under the threshold that banks flagged, spread out over days, then weeks. He consulted with Mr. Clark on the legality, ensuring every step was above board on his end. This wasn't theft, it was simply securing his share, anticipating the divorce, but doing it with a purpose that went beyond simple division. He confirmed the location of Brenda's convention in Las Vegas, the Westgate Resort and Casino, a fitting stage for what he had planned. The Westgate was known for its high-stakes tables, its lure for those with a compulsion. This detail felt like a gift, a piece falling perfectly into place. He called Mr. Peterson again. "I need you to orchestrate something," Dale began, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Brenda's at the Westgate for her convention. Mark Davis is likely there too. I need him caught, gambling heavily, and I need it to look like the money might be coming from Brenda." He explained his suspicions about Brenda's secret account, the transfers. Peterson listened, his usual calm demeanor unwavering. "I can arrange for discreet surveillance, Mr. Jensen," Peterson replied. "We can document Mr. Davis's activities, especially if he's using significant funds. We can also make sure the right people are alerted." "Exactly," Dale said. "I want his creditors to know. I want his superiors at the real estate firm to know. Not just about the gambling, but the possibility of embezzlement. And, he added, a cold edge to his voice, I want the firm to know about the affair, about Brenda's involvement in his financial issues if possible. He instructed Peterson to ensure the information reached the firm's HR department and, more importantly, its upper management. He wanted their careers to implode, spectacularly and publicly. While Peterson set his plan in motion, Dale began crafting anonymous tips. He used a burner phone and a public library computer, leaving no trace. He drafted several emails, each carefully worded, to a prominent local newspaper. The tips hinted at unethical behavior within one of the city's largest real estate firms. They spoke of an affair between two high-profile agents, a man with a known gambling problem and a woman with questionable financial dealings, hinting at the misuse of company resources and client trust. He didn't name names, but the details were specific enough that any investigative reporter worth their salt would quickly connect the dots to Brenda and Mark. He even suggested they look into recent large purchases by the female agent, drawing attention to Brenda's new designer clothes and jewelry. He sent the first batch of emails, then deleted his browsing history, wiped the phone, and walked out into the cool evening air. A grim satisfaction settled over him, a sense of quiet power. The storm was brewing, slowly, meticulously, beneath the calm surface of his everyday life. He returned home to an empty house, a faint scent of Brenda's perfume lingering in the air. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a canvas ready for his design. Brenda flew off to Honolulu, a week of sunshine and stolen moments with Mark Davis stretching before her. He watched her pull away from the driveway, her wave a casual, almost dismissive gesture. He noted the new suitcase in the trunk, a detail he'd seen Peterson's report about. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. As her plane climbed into the Midwestern sky, leaving contrails against the pale blue, his own plans, far more grounded and insidious, began to unfold. He felt no guilt, only a stark clarity of purpose. The house listing went up online within hours. He'd prearranged it with a real estate agent he knew from a high school football league, a quiet man who asked no questions beyond the practical. Then came the banks. He drained the remaining joint checking and savings accounts, leaving barely enough to cover a few outstanding small bills that couldn't be canceled immediately. The safe deposit box containing their modest collection of jewelry, a few old coins Brenda had inherited, and various important documents was empty too. He carefully kept only the items that were indisputably hers, setting them aside. Everything else, the shared assets, moved into the new, sole ownership account he had established with Mr. Clark's guidance. By the end of the day, Brenda's access to readily available funds was practically zero. It felt clinical, not emotional. Just a series of tasks executed with the precision of a trained mechanic. Mr. Peterson's report arrived via encrypted email, precise and timely. Mark Davis had indeed been spotted at the Westgate Resort and Casino, spending substantial amounts at the blackjack and roulette tables. Peterson's agents had documented it all, discreetly alerting Mark's known creditors. The real estate firm, too, had received an anonymous, detailed report, not just about the affair, but about Mark's escalating gambling problem, the potential embezzlement, and Brenda's possible involvement in his financial instability. The seeds of doubt had been planted deep in the fertile ground of corporate politics, destined to sprout into scandal. The anonymous tips to the local newspaper had also borne fruit. A subtle article appeared online, then in print, hinting at a scandal brewing in the local real estate market, involving a prominent agent and financial impropriety. No names were mentioned, but the descriptions were just vague enough to spark speculation and specific enough to make heads turn at Brenda's firm. The local real estate community was small. Whispers, Peterson reported, were already traveling fast, gaining momentum like a tumbleweed in a dry field. He hadn't forgotten Brenda's mother, Carol Miller. Dale had always maintained a cordial relationship with her, even after Brenda became more distant. He called Carol, feigning concern, his voice carefully calibrated to convey sadness and worry, not anger. He didn't accuse directly. Instead, he spoke of his profound worries about Brenda's recent behavior, her secretive trips, her increasing evasiveness. He mentioned with a heavy sigh that he'd accidentally come across some concerning documents. He fabricated a story about Mark Davis owing a significant amount of money, about Brenda perhaps trying to help him, suggesting she was in over her head, dangerously entangled. He didn't explicitly mention the affair, but he implied a closeness, a financial intimacy that was clearly inappropriate. He left enough breadcrumbs for Carol, a meticulous woman herself, to follow. He knew she would investigate, and he knew her loyalty, once broken, would shatter Brenda's last bastion of familial support. This plan, he realized, was not just about revenge. It was about exposing the truth, layer by painful layer. It's a stark reminder that every choice has its price, and some costs run deeper than money. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. A week later, Brenda called from the airport, her voice bright, tired from the flight, but still carrying a hint of vacation cheer. "I'm back, honey. Just landed. Be home in an hour." He hung up, a hollow pit in his stomach that had nothing to do with guilt. He knew the next few hours would be a whirlwind for her, a sudden, brutal awakening. He waited. The call came less than an hour later. Her voice, usually so composed, was thin, sharp with panic, crackling through the phone line, barely coherent. "What have you done, Jace? Our accounts are empty, and the house is for sale. I just got a call from the bank. What the hell is going on?" He held the phone away from his ear for a moment, letting the sound of her frantic voice dissipate into the quiet room. Then he brought it back. His own voice was a low, even hum, devoid of heat, devoid of apology. "You'll find out, Brenda," he said, the words slipping out like oil. "You'll find out exactly what I've done." He could hear her gasp, a raw, wounded sound, before he disconnected the call, the silence of his now empty house wrapping around him like a shroud. Brenda burst through the front door an hour later, her face a mask of fury and confusion. Her expensive suitcase clattered to the floor, forgotten. The house, usually so full of her presence, felt vast and empty. The living room rug was gone, the decorative lamps, the framed photos of them together on the mantel. The walls where their art once hung now showed faint rectangular shadows. He had packed away everything that felt like theirs, leaving only the bare necessities, the utilitarian furniture, the ghosts of a shared life. "What the hell is going on, Jace?" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the barren space. "What did you do with everything? The bank accounts are empty. The house is for sale. What did you do?" Her eyes, usually so calculating, were wild with panic. Dale sat on the edge of the dining room chair, a plain wooden chair he hadn't bothered to remove, a binder resting on the table in front of him. He gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit down, Brenda," he said, his voice quiet, unnervingly calm. "We need to talk." She hesitated, then slumped into the chair, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He pushed the binder across the table. It was thick, meticulously organized, each page separated by tabs. "Start anywhere," he said. Her eyes scanned the first page. A report from Mr. Peterson. Then another, bank statements, highlighting the transfers to her hidden account. Then text messages, explicit exchanges with Mark Davis. Her face, already pale, drained of all color. Finally, she landed on the last section, the medical report, confirming the tubal ligation had occurred years before they even met. "You lied to me, Brenda," he said, his voice flat, devoid of a single tremor. "About everything. About us, about children, about your love." He watched her face crumble. "You told me you were infertile, then you had your tubes tied a few years after we were married. But you had them tied before I ever even knew you. You never intended to have a family with me. You just tried to play me for a fool." He watched her, waiting for the denial, the anger, the tears. It all came. First, a weak attempt at denial. "No, Jace, that's not. Those are lies." Then, as her eyes darted over the overwhelming evidence, her defiance collapsed. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Please, Jace," she sobbed, her voice thick with desperation. "I love you. It was a mistake. All of it. A terrible, terrible mistake. I can fix it. We can fix it. Please, just tell me what you want me to do." She lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed, pleading. The manipulation, old and familiar, was still there, but now it was laced with genuine terror. Dale remained unmoved. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw only the years of calculated deceit. "No, Brenda," he said, his voice cold and hard as granite. "There's nothing to fix. It's over." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You wanted a fresh start? You're getting one. The house is listed. All the joint accounts are empty. Your secret account? I know about it. My lawyer knows about it. Every cent you siphoned off, we have documented. You'll get nothing from the divorce. Not a penny of my business, not a cent of my savings. Mr. Clark has prepared a full legal strategy. Infidelity, premarital deception about children, financial impropriety. It's all there." He continued, delivering the blows with a slow, deliberate cadence. "And Mark Davis, his gambling addiction, his debts, your company knows. His creditors know. The anonymous tips about the affair, the unethical behavior in the firm, they're already out there. The local paper ran a piece. Your reputation, your career, it's done. Your mother, by the way, knows a great deal about your troubles. Don't expect any sympathy from her." Brenda stared at him, her face paling further, then reddening with an ugly flush. The pleas died in her throat, replaced by a terrible dawning realization. Her eyes darted around the empty room, then back to the binder, then to his unyielding face. She finally understood. There was no way out, no recovery. Her carefully constructed world, her comfortable future, was not merely collapsing. It was being meticulously, ruthlessly dismantled. Her despair twisted into a desperate, guttural scream, a raw, animal sound of pure rage and defeat. She lunged forward, overturning the chair, but he was already standing, retreating a step, watching her. Dale watched her breakdown, the raw, ugly unraveling of the woman he thought he knew. The fury, the desperation, the realization of her ruin. It was all there. A hollow victory, a bleak satisfaction, settled deep in his chest. The weight of his actions, heavy and unyielding, was finally in place. The news spread through the real estate firm like wildfire. The anonymous tips, the rumors from Las Vegas about Mark Davis's gambling, the whispers about Brenda's financial impropriety, it all coalesced into a raging scandal. Mr. Harrison, the firm's owner, was a man who valued reputation above all else. He called them both into his office, a furious storm brewing behind his usually calm eyes. The terminations were swift and public. "You've jeopardized everything this company has built," he told them, his voice tight with barely contained rage. "I won't tolerate it. Pack your things." Brenda's reputation, once her most valuable asset, was now shattered. Clients who had once trusted her with their life savings pulled their listings, unwilling to be associated with scandal. The local real estate board launched an immediate review of her professional license, the initial findings pointing towards gross negligence and ethical violations. Her name, once on billboards, was now whispered in hushed tones, a cautionary tale. Mark Davis fared no better. His creditors, emboldened by the public exposure of his gambling addiction, began aggressive legal action. There were talks of embezzlement charge, given the substantial amounts he'd been gambling, and the suspicious timing of his payouts. His life, Dale learned through Peterson's continued monitoring, was in shambles. He'd lost his job, his savings, and soon, likely, his freedom. Then came the call from Carol Miller. Dale had anticipated it, the slow burn of his mother-in-law's discovery. Carol, a woman of strict morals, didn't hold back. Brenda called Dale in a fresh wave of tears and fury, relaying the conversation. "She said she was disgusted, Jace. Disgusted. She told me I'd made my bed and I could lie in it," Brenda wailed, the emotional blow from her own mother far more painful than any legal or professional consequence. The last shred of familial support Brenda had was gone, replaced by condemnation. The divorce proceeded with the cold efficiency Mr. Clark had promised. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Brenda's attempts to discredit Dale, to claim emotional distress or financial coercion, were expertly countered by Clark, who laid out the timeline of her deception and financial misdealings with meticulous detail. She was left with next to nothing. The hidden account, once a comfort, was now a mere fraction of what she'd planned. largely consumed by her own legal fees and attempts to fight a losing battle. The house sold quickly, the market buoyant, and Dale's financial position was solidified, untainted by Brenda's choices. The money from the sale, combined with the funds he'd legally transferred, ensured his security. Brenda, in contrast, was left without a home, without a job, without a reputation. Dale moved out of the marital home before the closing into a smaller, temporary apartment on the other side of town. The place was sparse, functional. As he unpacked a few boxes, placing a handful of old books on a flimsy shelf, he felt a profound sense of emptiness. The victory was complete, absolute, but it didn't bring the sense of triumph he had anticipated. Instead, a quiet hollowness settled in his chest, a vacuum where years of shared life used to be. Gary Olson called often, checking in, and Steve, another friend from the shop, stopped by with a six-pack of beer on a Friday night. They offered comfort, told him he'd done the right thing, that Brenda deserved everything she got. He nodded, listened, but the words felt distant. He had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations, and yet the satisfaction was cold, fleeting. He was free, yes, but the man who had loved Brenda, the man who had believed in a future with her, was irrevocably changed. A fundamental part of him had been carved out, leaving behind a space that felt strangely, terrifyingly quiet. The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday morning, a date now etched into Dale's memory. The judge's gavel struck, a small, definitive wound, and it was done. Brenda sat across the courtroom, her face gaunt, her eyes vacant, a pale shadow of the woman she once was. She was left financially ruined, her professional license revoked, and her reputation utterly destroyed. She had nothing. Mark Davis's fate was equally bleak. His court date came a few weeks later. The scale of his gambling, the fraudulent loans, the embezzlement from clients, it was all laid bare. He received a substantial prison sentence, his addiction and deceit now public record, his life a wreckage. Dale read the newspaper article with a detached interest, a confirmation of a chapter closed. Brenda, Dale learned from various whispers, had moved back in with her mother, Carol. The house she once so proudly owned, the life she had so carefully curated, was gone, replaced by a cramped room in her childhood home. Carol Miller's disappointment was a palpable thing, weighing heavily on Brenda, a constant reminder of her fall. The revenge had been complete, successful beyond any reasonable expectation. But the victory felt hollow, sterile. Dale found himself deeply fatigued, the adrenaline that had fueled his methodical planning now completely drained. The satisfaction, so grimly anticipated, was fleeting, a quick flicker that faded into a vast, unsettling emptiness. The intricate web of deceit and destruction he had woven had consumed not only Brenda, but also a significant portion of his own emotional landscape. He knew he couldn't stay in that quiet apartment, haunted by the echoes of his past self. He started therapy, a decision he had resisted for years. The sessions were long, often uncomfortable, as he slowly began to unpack the layers of betrayal, anger, and his own transformation into a man capable of such calculated destruction. His therapist, a kind, observant woman named Dr. Evans, encouraged him to explore the why behind his actions, not just the what. He spoke of the deep wound of Brenda's deception, the fundamental shattering of trust, the feeling of being made a fool. Dale slowly started rebuilding. He focused intensely on his career at Jensen Tires. His father, aging gracefully, had recently offered him the position of chief financial officer. It was a promotion Dale had quietly coveted for years, a testament to his dedication and understanding of the business. He accepted, but the thrill, the sense of achievement, felt muted. It was a dream realized, but tainted by the path he had taken to get there. He reconnected with Gary and Steve, playing cards on Friday nights, going fishing on Saturdays. He started running again, clearing his head on the old country roads around town. He found himself reevaluating everything, his desires for the future, for a family, for a partner. The idea of trusting someone again felt like an impossibly distant mountain to climb. The lie about the children still stung, a raw reminder of what he had lost. One quiet evening, Dale sat on the porch of his new house, a small, modest bungalow he'd bought with the proceeds from the sale of the old home, a place that felt like his own. He watched the vast indifferent stars over the Midwestern sky, the constellations indifferent to human triumphs and tragedies. He thought about Brenda, about Mark, about the wreckage he had wrought. He acknowledged the burning anger that had driven him, the justifiable outrage at being lied to, manipulated, and betrayed so profoundly. He had been wronged, undeniably. But he also grappled with the ruthlessness of his revenge, the cold efficiency with which he had dismantled two lives. He had won, but the victory felt heavy, stained. He understood then that while Brenda had paid a devastating price for her deceit, so too had a part of himself. The man who had entered that marriage, full of hope and trust, was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, forever marked by the price of vengeance. Months had folded into a year since the divorce finalized. Dale was now comfortably settled into his role as chief financial officer at Jensen Tires. He excelled at it, his methodical mind finding a certain satisfaction in the spreadsheets and projections. The business thrived under his steady hand, a testament to his focus and dedication. His office, once merely functional, now reflected a quiet confidence. Therapy continued. Dr. Evans had helped him dissect the layers of betrayal, the anger, and the cold precision of his revenge. It wasn't about erasing the past, she explained, but understanding it, integrating it into who he was now. He spoke of Brenda, of the lies, of the hollow feeling after her downfall. The sessions were a steady anchor, a place to process the profound shifts within him. Occasionally, through the grapevine of a small town, Dale would hear whispers of Brenda's continued struggles. She was working odd jobs, still living with her mother, her once bright future reduced to a gray existence. The news no longer stirred the grim satisfaction it once had. It simply existed, another fact in a landscape of facts. The sting of her betrayal had dulled, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of consequence, a neutral observation of a life undone. He had started tentatively to explore new relationships. Dinners with women he met through friends, polite conversations over coffee. He approached these interactions with a newfound caution, a meticulous observation of character, a clearer understanding of what true trust entailed. He was no longer naive, no longer willing to overlook red flags in the pursuit of comfort. He spoke less of his past, more of his present, and the future he was now carefully building. One evening, after a particularly introspective therapy session, Dale made a decision that felt profoundly right. He would pursue adoption. The desire for children, a quiet ache Brenda had so cruelly extinguished, had reemerged, stronger and clearer than before. He wanted to nurture, to guide, to offer a life of stability and love. It wouldn't be his biological child, but it would be his child, a new legacy, untainted by the past. He began researching agencies, the paperwork a welcome distraction, a tangible step towards a future he could truly claim. His relationship with his father deepened. They spent more time talking, not just about the business, but about life, about family, about the quiet strength that ran through the Jensen men. His father, seeing the transformation in Dale, the new resolve, offered quiet pride and steady support. Dale found solace in the legacy of his family, in the honest work, in the bedrock values that had always underpinned their lives. A new sense of peace slowly began to emerge. It wasn't the boisterous joy he might have imagined in a different life. It was quieter, deeper, an acceptance of the scars he carried, the understanding that pain was a part of his story, but not its end. He realized that forgiveness, he learned, wasn't a gift he gave to Brenda. It was a gift he gave to himself, a way to release the bitterness, to unchain himself from the past, to stop carrying the weight of her deceit. He had made Brenda pay, yes, exacted a cold, devastating justice. But in doing so, he had also, paradoxically, found a way to reclaim his own life, tempered by the fire of experience, scarred but resilient.